I do not know, but perhaps I will be the first person in the history of cheating wives who is truly grateful to his wife's lover with all his heart for ruining my marriage. It sounds strange, but it really is. I've found a whole new life. It's a rarity for me to fall ill, but on a particular Thursday morning I found myself succumbing to a vicious strain of flu making its rounds in the office. My symptoms were so pronounced that my boss decided it best for me to head home rather than risk infecting the entire workplace. Around noon, I arrived home with the expectation that my wife, Beth, would attend to my ailment with care. I envisioned her preparing nourishing chicken soup, checking my temperature, and fussing over me before tucking me into bed. However, as I neared our house, I spotted a green pickup truck occupying our driveway. In that moment, my focus was solely on how wretched I felt, so I didn't give the vehicle much thought. Since the truck was an unfamiliar sight and had displaced my usual beat-up SUV, I parked along the curb. Entering through the garage, which led into the kitchen, I found no trace of Beth in either the kitchen or the front den. At that moment, a queasy feeling arose in my stomach, unrelated to any flu, especially when I approached the back of the house where our bedroom was located, and began to unmistakably distinguish the sounds of betrayal. I quietly crept up to the slightly ajar door and peeked inside. There, to my surprise, I saw Beth cheating on me with some strange man, and she seemed to enjoy every moment. I watched from my vantage point, remaining unnoticed as they were engrossed in their own affairs. My reaction was unusual. Part of me undoubtedly wanted to step in and stop their meeting, but the other part of me was numb. It is important to clarify that I did not like it. This is if someone thinks that I enjoyed what I saw. When you've loved someone as long as I had loved Beth, witnessing that person cheating on you isn't arousing, at least not for someone wired normally. And I was, and always had been, someone who took fidelity seriously. In an instant, as Beth and her boyfriend reached their climax, I had an epiphany. A moment of clarity where my future unfolded before my eyes. In that moment, I made a decision that my life was changing, for the better. I pulled out my cell phone, pushed the door open, switched to camera mode, and snapped about 4 clear pictures of the surprised lovers. With visual evidence of my wife's infidelity and that of her paramour, I turned on my heel and briskly left the house the same way I had entered. On my way out of the garage, I paused to grab a screwdriver, then casually used it to puncture 2 of the jerk's truck tires. I know, it was juvenile, but it felt like the least I could do. Afterwards, I got into my SUV and drove off, making sure to note down the pickup's license plate number. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. While driving aimlessly, thoughts swirled in my mind about what I had just witnessed, realizing it had been simmering for quite some time. The duration of Beth's infidelity was unknown to me, whether this man was her first betrayal or merely another in a series. Yet, it didn't matter. Truthfully, I was indifferent. Perhaps a bit of backstory is necessary here. I'm Peter Thornhill, aged 48 at the time of this tale, married to Beth for precisely half of those years. Once, we were deeply in love, almost from the moment we met. Our encounter followed my graduation from college, as I embarked on a career with a major manufacturing firm in a mid-sized Midwestern city. I had grown up in western Nebraska, yearning for the proximity of mountains where I had spent countless summers camping. Beth hailed from the city where we had spent our entire married life. Pinpointing when my marriage deteriorated is elusive. It was a gradual, imperceptible decline, invisible to outsiders but palpable to me as it approached its end. We all have aspirations, and mine was to reside in the mountains, crafting the great American novel. Beth, on the other hand, seemed to yearn for a simpler dream of finding a husband and building a family in her hometown. However, as fate would have it, dreams often collide with the harsh realities of life. My dream shattered against the pragmatic shores of reality, leading me to become entrenched in a mundane Midwestern town, writing computer code for the same company I joined fresh out of college. Despite reaching a certain level on the corporate ladder, I found myself stagnant, watching more ambitious colleagues surpass me. My reluctance to compromise on quality and disdain for shortcuts hindered my progress. Moreover, my proficiency in my role rendered me indispensable but also overlooked for promotions, though I did receive regular raises and occasional bonuses. Yet my passivity exacerbated my predicament. I was content to blend in, both in my career and marriage. To clarify, Beth, with her dark brown hair and full figure, remained attractive to me, despite not shedding all the weight from bearing our children. However, it seems someone else shared that sentiment. After getting married, we purchased a house shortly thereafter. It was situated in a respectable neighborhood, though not in an upscale area. The house dated back to the 1960s, and some of its components remained unchanged since then. Gradually, we began replacing one appliance after another, without any specific plan, and constant repairs and patch-ups became routine. We often discussed the idea of acquiring a better property, but after refinancing the mortgage multiple times to secure loans, we realized we had priced ourselves out of the possibility of selling it. In essence, the amount needed to settle the loan and upgrade exceeded the actual value of the house. We could have sold it at a lower price to someone interested in renovating it, but that wouldn't have addressed the challenge of finding a more suitable and affordable place to live. Additionally, we faced challenges regarding our children. 3 years into our marriage, we welcomed our first child, Jason, followed by a girl, Laura, 4 years later. These children epitomize the challenges parents face, akin to those observed in the animal kingdom, where sometimes parents consume their offspring. I made efforts to instill discipline, albeit Beth's approach leaned towards indulgence, granting them whatever they desired. She adamantly opposed any form of physical punishment for their misbehavior. The consequences of this conflict were significant. Jason displayed laziness, disrespect, and untidiness, while Laura exhibited signs of neurotic behavior and promiscuity. They quickly learned to manipulate Beth and me to fulfill their desires, resulting in our loss of authority by the time they reached adolescence. Jason struggled to maintain employment, frequently losing minimum wage jobs since barely graduating from high school. Employers, it seemed, preferred punctuality and a decent appearance. He resided in a rundown house in town with 3 similarly unmotivated friends, and I suspected he indulged in substance abuse. Meanwhile, Laura's academic performance suffered due to her constant use of an MP3 player during class. Additionally, she became involved with a dubious college student covered in tattoos. Beth, employed as a nurse, favored working night shifts. Consequently, on her working days, I would return home around 5:30, sometimes sharing dinner before she departed for work at approximately 6:15. Due to our conflicting schedules, our communication decreased and our intimacy gradually declined. We managed to make time for each other from time to time, maybe once or twice a month, usually on weekends when she was free. Our relationship remained stable until about 18 months before this incident, when her attitude towards me changed in a negative way. Although she was always a bit moody, the menopause made it much worse. Gradually, she began to refuse me, often citing headaches or fatigue as reasons for abstinence, and often went to bed before me. Moreover, she became increasingly critical of my actions, or lack of them. Looking back, I realized that the warning signs were obvious, but I didn't recognize them at the time. During times when I expected Beth to be awake and active, I would occasionally try calling the house, only to receive no response. On some occasions, she would go out for drinks with coworkers at a late-night bar popular among those on the night shift. There were instances when she'd return home after working weekends and immediately start doing laundry, seemingly eager to wash something before I could notice. All signs seemed to point to Beth's infidelity, but as I mentioned, it didn't really matter to me. So let's recap. I was trapped in a dead-end job in a dull town, living in an overpriced, dilapidated house. I didn't have any intimate life, my unkind wife had an affair on the side, and my children were doomed to trouble. What options did I have? Likely, I did what I ultimately did. Actually, the first thing I did was visit the walk-in clinic for my flu symptoms. After receiving a steroid shot and a prescription for antibiotics, I started to feel a bit better. Then I went to Walmart to get my prescription filled and pick up some essentials like toiletries, a hot plate, a small pot, soup, and sodas. Afterward, I drove across town to check into a motel. Before going to Walmart, I made a stop at the bank to withdraw some cash for a few days' stay at the motel. After settling in, I devised a plan for the upcoming days while heating a can of soup. After eating what I could manage, I stored the remainder in the mini-fridge, then retired to bed and fell asleep. When I woke up in darkness, I felt disoriented until recalling my whereabouts and purpose. Still weakened by the flu, I was too overwhelmed by illness and the shock of encountering Beth in that state to fully process what had occurred. Reheating the remaining soup, I drank a Sprite and watched a football game on TV before returning to bed. I glanced at my phone to find numerous missed calls from Beth, to which I responded with a grim smile. Let her worry, I thought. The following morning I felt significantly better. My first action was to inform the office of my absence. Upon calling, my boss's secretary informed me of Beth's persistent attempts to reach me. If she calls again today, which I expect she will, just inform her that I'm unwell and won't be in, I instructed. Where are you, Pete? She inquired. Let's just say I'm not at home, got it? I replied before ending the call, making it clear that I no longer had a residence. Having contemplated my course of action extensively, I grew increasingly satisfied with my decisions. I couldn't bring myself to resent Beth. It was evident she no longer wished to remain married to me. Whatever she desired, something beyond my ability to provide, I refused to hinder her pursuit of it. If she sought intimacy with other men, so be it. I granted her the liberty to do as she pleased, freeing myself in the process. Nevertheless, there were repercussions to address. Nothing severe, but consequences nonetheless for both Beth and her paramour. My initial action was to contact the motor vehicle department, expressing interest in purchasing a pickup truck, for which I'd misplaced the owner's contact details. Armed only with the license plate number, along with the make, model, and color of the vehicle, the helpful attendant readily provided me with the man's name and address. Subsequently, I reached out to a lawyer friend for a recommendation on the town's top divorce attorney. Following the advice, I arranged a meeting with the recommended attorney, a woman, for 1 o'clock that afternoon. After showering, I headed to the lobby for a light breakfast before going to the bank. I had purchased 2 certificates of deposit years ago, which I cashed along with withdrawing half of the money from our joint savings and checking accounts. Most of the funds went into a new checking account solely in my name, along with a bank debit card, leaving me with over $4,000 in traveler's checks. I then spent some time contacting credit card companies to cancel and transfer ownership of all but one card to my name, settling the balances on each. I didn't bother with the card I left for Beth, leaving her to deal with it. Afterward, I visited a public library branch to use their computers. I transferred 4 clear and explicit images from my phone to an email address, printing 2 copies of each. Finally, I researched information on the individual my wife was with the previous day, one Clark Slater. I discovered he was married, so I made a note of his wife's name. Afterward, I placed copies of the photos along with a note indicating where I could be contacted for further information into an envelope addressed to her. I then went to the post office, purchased stamps, and sent it off to her. Following that, I had an appointment with Grace Shaw, the attorney. I briefed her on my actions and intentions, and she simply nodded upon seeing the pictures. However, her initial query was one of caution. "Divorce seems quite drastic with such short notice," she remarked. "Are you certain you don't wish to attempt reconciliation?" "What is there to reconcile?" I replied. "My wife is involved with another man, and I have no desire to obstruct true love. I have places to go and things to accomplish in my life, and remaining with a cheating spouse is not part of those plans." Ultimately, I agreed to a legal separation, spanning 90 days. Divorce papers were drafted, and if, after the 3-month period, I remained resolute in ending my marriage, the papers would be filed, and Beth would be served. Grace inquired about your preferences for a settlement if you proceed with the divorce, I said. I've already claimed half of the liquid cash from our bank, I replied. She has a 403B from her job, which she can keep, but she won't receive any of my 401k. She can also retain the house since the mortgage is in her name. But if she sells it, I expect half of the proceeds. All right, Mr. Thornhill, that covers it, Grace confirmed. I'll await your updates in around 3 months. My final stop was at the office, not for work. I visited the Human Resources Department to inquire about early retirement. With 26 years in the company, I had accumulated a substantial retirement fund. I learned that I could access my pension at age 60, which was still 12 years away. Disappointing news. However, I brightened when I asked about cashing in my 401k, though the HRD representative strongly advised against it due to the significant tax penalty. However, if I desired, I could instantly cash out around $65,000. I expressed gratitude to the woman and returned to my motel. Exhausted, I made another pot of chicken soup before retiring to bed, sleeping for nearly 7 hours. Upon awakening past midnight, I knew the most challenging part of my day awaited, retrieving my belongings from the house. Beth was supposed to be at work, but her absence was uncertain. As it turned out, she hadn't gone to work. Finding Beth asleep, the house remained silent. Laura, apparently worried about my absence, had left for her usual Friday night outing. I pondered if the children would even notice my absence. Likely not. Firstly, I gathered necessary items from the garage: tools, camping gear, and other useful items. Next, I retrieved my laptop from the office, transferred files from the home PC, and then loaded it into my vehicle. I had a couple of boxes with me filled with CDs, a portable player, numerous books, and meaningful mementos, including a few photos. None of Beth, though. After loading these into my vehicle, I retrieved some suitcases and quietly entered my former bedroom. I was halfway through packing when I heard a soft gasp behind me, followed by Beth's voice. "Peter, where have you been?" she asked. "I've been so worried about you." "Have you now?" I replied, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. "What are you doing?" Beth inquired. "What does it look like I'm doing?" I responded sarcastically. Packing? Beth stuttered. "Give that girl a gold star for brilliance," I remarked. "Peter, I'm so sorry," she began, but I cut her off. "Beth, I don't want to hear your excuses or apologies," I stated. "It doesn't matter why or how or even who, although I do know that much. If you want to love someone else, fine, I'm letting you." "But I don't love him," she protested. "I love you. I don't want him. I want you." "Could have fooled me," I retorted in a bitter tone. "It sounded like you wanted him pretty badly yesterday afternoon." Beth sat with her face buried in her hands, tears streaming down uncontrollably. I observed her quietly. Any trace of anger I might have felt had dissipated, replaced by, I couldn't quite pinpoint it. Sympathy? Not quite. Contempt? Perhaps a hint. Revulsion? Yes, to some extent. Yet, above all, I came to the stark realization that what I felt most was emptiness. In that moment, it dawned on me that I harbored no emotions for her anymore. I was simply indifferent. Completing my packing, I allowed her to weep into her pillow. It wasn't until I made my way to the bedroom door with the suitcases that she sprang from the bed, attempting to halt my departure. "Wait," Beth pleaded. "Don't go, Pete, please. Can't we sort this out, please? I'm sorry, it meant nothing. It was just a physical encounter." I remained silent, disentangling myself from her grasp and proceeding to the front of the house. Beth trailed after me, sobbing uncontrollably. I gestured towards the legal separation notice on the kitchen table, amidst the remnants of our pizza dinner from that night. "I'll be back in 3 months around the middle of December," I announced. If my intentions do not change, I will file for divorce. I will keep you informed of my location, but for now I am leaving without having a clear idea of my destination. Goodbye, Beth. Maybe I'll see you again, Beth exclaimed when I came out carrying my suitcases. Without looking back, I got into the car and drove back across town to my motel room. The next day, because it was Saturday, I slept until morning. When I woke up, I packed my things and left the motel. The cost of staying at the motel was $85 per night, so I chose a hotel near my office, where discounts were offered for long stays. For about $45 a night, I rented a neat room with a kitchenette, cable internet access, and a large TV for 2 weeks. I indulged in a bit of adult entertainment, but mostly spent the weekend playing football and relaxing completely. I returned to work on Monday morning and immediately submitted my resignation letter to my boss, which took effect 2 weeks later. Naturally, my decision shocked everyone in the office. After being a regular employee for so long, I probably merged with the background. My boss in particular was furious, spending the next 2 weeks trying to talk me out of retirement, but I remained adamant. During the first week, I received a call from my daughter on Tuesday. It turned out to be a revealing conversation. "Daddy, why are you leaving us?" Laura inquired. "You'll have to ask your mother about that," I responded. "She said to ask you," Laura retorted. "All right," I conceded. On Thursday afternoon, I found her in bed with someone else. I was down with the flu, left work early, and there she was. I have evidence to support it. "Wow," Laura exclaimed. "I didn't think she was capable of that." "Well, that explains why she's been so emotional. Daddy, she's a mess. She spends her time crying and blaming herself. She called in sick all 3 days this weekend, you know." "Tell your mother to pull herself together," I said through gritted teeth. "If she thinks she can manipulate me into returning, she's mistaken. I've already filed for retirement, and a week from Saturday I'm leaving. After that, what she, you, or your irresponsible brother do is not my concern." "Well, damn, I love you too." "Dad," Laura cried. "Hey, you never cared about me before. Why start now?" I retorted. "You're just worried the easy ride is about to end." "That's not true," Laura said thoughtfully. I need you. You're the only sensible one in this house, and I don't know what will happen without you." "I'm sure you'll manage," I said. "Look, Laura, I apologize for what I said. That was harsh of me. I'll keep in touch and I'll be home for Christmas, all right? I love you, truly." "I know, Daddy," she sniffled. "I love you too." Jason never called. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been quite occupied. Beth made numerous attempts to reach me, but after I hung up on her several times, she got the hint that I wasn't interested in talking. Her coworkers attempted to persuade me to meet with her, but I declined, expressing my refusal quite bluntly. It turns out, Clark Slater, a nurse from Beth's workplace, had been involved with her for about 6 months. Most people I spoke to believed he was the only one she had cheated on me with, although they couldn't confirm. I made it clear to all of them how grateful I was for letting me know about my wife's infidelity. They didn't have much to say after that. During the first week, I received a call from Clark Slater's wife, revealing that Beth wasn't the first nurse, married or otherwise, he had been involved with. However, Beth would be the last, at least while he remained her husband, as I had finally provided her with solid evidence to kick him out. Interestingly, I never heard from Clark, neither regarding Beth nor his vandalized tires. Before departing from my job, I had a multitude of tasks to complete. Firstly, I needed to train someone capable of handling my responsibilities until a full-time replacement was hired. Secondly, I had to ensure my 12-year-old vehicle received servicing. Additionally, I had to search for a broker to transfer my 401k into a private account and coordinate with HRD regarding my severance pay and the utilization of my remaining sick time. During my downtime, I mainly occupied myself by watching TV, browsing on my laptop, or purchasing items necessary for my departure. I also made time to catch up with a few friends. all of whom expressed disbelief at Beth's alleged infidelity. The arrival of my last day of work, the second Friday, brought a twinge of regret. After dedicating 26 years to the company, I had forged many friendships there. During lunch that day, my boss gathered our department for a small retirement celebration, during which I unexpectedly became emotional. Attempting to deliver a brief thank you speech, I found myself overcome with tears, marking the first time I had cried in years. My emotions stemmed from both the sadness of leaving and the circumstances that led me to retire. Over the past 2 weeks, I had been so occupied that I hadn't allowed myself to confront the emotions stemming from Beth's betrayal. Seeing my co-workers gathered to honor me was overwhelming. However, I quickly moved past it, especially when Marcy Glover approached me and invited me to an after-work get-together with some of them at Chili's. Naturally, I accepted, despite making it clear that I don't drink. Marcy, a fellow computer enthusiast, was strikingly attractive. In her early 30s, she was a tall, blonde divorcee with a 10-year-old daughter spending the weekend with her father. As she mentioned this, she gave me a suggestive look. I must confess I was taken aback. Though I don't consider myself unattractive, in fact I appear younger than my age, I never thought of myself as particularly appealing. Standing a bit shorter than average at 5'9", wearing glasses, sporting a slight belly, and lacking a chiseled physique, I didn't see myself as a heartthrob. Yet that evening revealed a surprising revelation about my allure. Our group consisted of 7 people, including 3 women, 2 men, Marcy, and myself. For once, I found myself at the center of attention. We spent hours chatting over beers, or in my case, tea, sharing stories about work, the town, and each other. Amid the merriment, we also enjoyed a hearty dinner. As the evening progressed, I found myself sitting next to Marcy, and it became quite obvious that she was flirting with me. She was sitting very close with her hand on my forearm. I couldn't determine if her actions were caused by alcohol or genuine interest. Around 9 o'clock, we started to disperse. Considering that I had to get up early the next day, I got up to leave. However, when I looked at Marcy, I realized that she shouldn't drive in her condition and offered to give her a ride. After exchanging hugs and good wishes, I escorted Marcy to my Explorer. Once inside, she moved closer, put her hand on my hip, and stared at me intently. "I'm not as drunk as you might think," Marcy admitted. "I just wanted to give you a ride, but not to my house." "Where would you like me to take you?" I feigned incomprehension. "Take me to your motel," she replied, then pulled my face to her and kissed me. "Marcy, you don't have to do this," I said. "I mean, of course I'm lonely, but I don't want pity." "It's not about pity," she insisted. "Pete, I've liked you since I started working there, and now I finally have the opportunity. I'm not going to lose sight of that." "Did you like me?" I asked. "Come on, Marcy, look at me. I'm overweight and have gray hair." Marcy waved her hand, describing me as a well-built, mature man. "First of all, you're not too dense. Secondly, gray hair adds to your attractiveness. Thirdly, you are quite handsome. And finally, you are one of the kindest men I know. Unlike many others in our circle, you have never flirted with me or with other women. We've all noticed it. You've always behaved with dignity." "I have always been a faithful husband," I replied with a touch of sadness. "Look, you're leaving tomorrow and you deserve to be pampered before you leave," Marcy insisted. "So, are you going to take me to your motel and have fun or not?" I grinned and started the engine. To tell the truth, I've fantasized about Marcy Glover countless times, but I've always thought she was out of my reach. Besides, I was devoted to my marriage. Technically, I was still officially married, but emotionally, I knew it was over. Marcy Glover offered to entertain me, and I wasn't going to turn it down. As soon as the door to my room closed, we immediately got down to business. It all started in the hallway and ended on the bed. I leaned back on the bed and watched Marcy. "Thank you," I said. "Beth would never let that happen." "I can understand why some women might think that way," Marcy replied. "Personally, I find it incredibly cool." We reclined on the bed, resting for a while before proceeding to the next round. And after that, we fell asleep together. As the faint light of dawn filtered through the curtains, we made love one last time before getting up, showering, and getting dressed. Marcy helped me pack my things, and then I drove away, taking her back to where her car was parked. Before we parted, she kissed me and looked me straight in the eyes. "Pete, all I can say is your wife made a foolish decision," she remarked. "She doesn't realize what she's giving up." "Well, I suppose sometimes you become accustomed to someone and fall into a routine," I replied. "Maybe I didn't do enough from my end. You know how it goes." "Yeah, I understand," Marcy nodded. "Pete, I hope you find what you're searching for, but if you ever decide to return here for a while, look me up. I promise I'll treat you much better than Beth did." "Thanks, Marcy," I acknowledged. "I'll keep in touch. You never know what the future holds. Take care, okay?" "You too," she replied. "Be safe." And with that I departed. I set my vehicle on the westbound interstate and didn't glance back. I embarked on a solo journey across the country with no plans, no schedule, no agenda. I had destinations in the West I wished to visit, things I wanted to experience, but no fixed timetable. I would follow my instincts wherever they led. It was something I had yearned to do for years, but had never been able to. Whether due to financial constraints, family obligations, or work commitments, there was always something holding me back. Now I had none of those impediments. However, my initial destination was my hometown. I intended to spend a few days with my aging parents and catch up with old friends. Unexpectedly, I reunited with one friend, which turned out to be a delightful experience. Upon hearing about my breakup with Beth, my parents expressed disappointment, though my mom admitted she wasn't surprised. "She hasn't appeared very happy during her recent visits," Mom remarked. The next Monday, while at the supermarket gathering supplies for my journey, I heard someone calling my name. Looking around, I couldn't help but smile as I spotted a blast from the past. It was Dolores Valdez, a former classmate of mine. Though she was a year younger, we often shared classes throughout school and developed a friendship. Back then, Dolores was quite the catch, a bit too fast-paced for me, but time had mellowed her out. She'd learned the hard lesson that the fast lane wasn't always the best route. Yet, time had been kind to her. She remained stunning. If anything, age had enhanced her beauty since high school, softening her features and adding a touch of allure. Standing a tad below average height, she boasted thick, dark locks, captivating brown eyes, and curves in all the right places. After her second divorce, she returned to town, working as an assistant manager at a nearby store. Her cozy home in a serene neighborhood, not far from her daughter's family, was where she resided solo. As we caught up, I mentioned my impending divorce, sparking a gleam in her eyes. "I'm free tomorrow," she suggested warmly. "How about joining me for dinner?" "Sounds wonderful," I replied. "Any particular place?" Her response came with a hint of nostalgia. "How about my place? It's been ages since I've cooked for a man, especially an old friend like you." The next day, around 7 p.m., I arrived at Dolores's and saw that she was wearing a tight-fitting red dress with thin straps, tastefully made up. The dress clung to her, emphasizing her figure. Upon entering her small but at the same time neat house, I was greeted by the seductive aroma of oven-baked enchiladas and a variety of Mexican delicacies that were being prepared for dinner. It quickly became apparent that Dolores was not only an excellent cook, but also a fascinating conversationalist. As we waited for dinner to finish cooking, we sat closely together in her living room, catching up on each other's lives. She showed great understanding regarding what had happened to me, and also sympathized with Beth's situation. Dolores had experienced the breakdown of her first marriage due to infidelity, and her second marriage had ended similarly due to her husband's infidelity. She offered insights from both perspectives which didn't necessarily comfort me but provided some clarity. The dinner turned out to be exceptional, Enchiladas, tostadas, rice, and the most delicious flan I've ever tasted. How do you manage to stay so slim despite cooking like this? I joked, patting my full stomach. Oh, I only cook like this on special occasions, Dolores chuckled. If I indulged every day, I'd be as wide as I am tall. We returned to the living room and sat down next to each other on the couch again. We talked for a while, eventually touching on the topic of why she invited me that evening. I wanted to do something that I never had when we were in high school, she explained. You were always so kind, so charming, so attractive. But I knew I would never be able to woo you back then. My parents wouldn't approve if I dated someone who wasn't Hispanic. It's ironic, isn't it? They didn't mind me talking to all these gang members if they were Mexican. But a good white guy? It was out of the question. But you don't face this problem anymore, do you? I noticed as I brought my face close to hers. Then we kissed. Dolores showed an eagerness reminiscent of a hungry man's desire, which amused me. She shed a few tears when I asked her how long it had been since her last romantic encounter. It's been too long, she admitted. When I returned here, I vowed not to enter into any more reckless relationships fueled by memories of the past. But in a small town, these memories persist. If I got $5 for every offer from someone I went to school with last year, I would be financially secure. That's why this event means so much to me. Once upon a time, you never judged me and would not have made an inappropriate offer if I hadn't invited you here. I know you. You wouldn't do that. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have thought of it, I chuckled. Believe me, Dolores, you were the subject of my fantasies. For some inexplicable reason, it completely won her over when she muttered something in Spanish before passionately hugging me. She quickly took off my sweater, then my t-shirt, and so on, and then magic happened. Collapsing onto her back, I couldn't help but chuckle contentedly. It was then that I started thinking about the sequence of events triggered by Clark Slater that freed me from the stagnation in my life. Thanks to him and his affair with my wife, I was spared the routine of living in an inconspicuous town, a loveless marriage, and the chaos of family life in a dilapidated house. I was free to work for a faceless corporation that no longer challenged me. Now, I could explore new horizons with a clear conscience, fulfill any desires and meet anyone. All this became possible thanks to the disclosure of my wife's infidelity. After catching our breath, Dolores and I retired to her spacious bathroom, one of the few luxuries she has allowed herself since returning to the city. The next day, I spent time with my family before going on a trip in earnest. On the way, I reflected that it had been exactly 3 weeks since I met Beth and Clark, 3 weeks that had completely changed my life. This trip was the first step in my acquaintance with a new life. Over the next 3 months, I traveled to the western regions of the country, visiting places that I had only read about before. My first destination was Mount Rushmore, after which I explored the site of the Battle of the Little Bighorn for a couple of days. I wandered around the neighborhood feeling connected to the spirit of Custer and the 7th Cavalry Regiment, as well as to the spirit of Crazy Horse and his warriors. Following that, I embarked on a journey to Jackson Hole, where I camped for a week and a half, exploring Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. Continuing my travels, I headed north to spend some time in northern Idaho, setting up camp by the shores of Lake Penn D'Oriel. I had visited the area once before during a Boy Scout jamboree in 1969, where my fellow scouts and I missed witnessing the first moon landing as we were situated far from any televisions. During my stay, I indulged in fishing on the lake and exploring the scenic trails, relishing the refreshing atmosphere of the northern Rockies. However, waking up one late October morning to find 3 inches of snow on the ground signaled that it was time to seek warmer climates. Subsequently, I made my way to Seattle before tracing the Pacific coast through Oregon, eventually reaching the Napa Valley, where I savored some of the region's exceptional wines. From there, I proceeded to Yosemite for an extended stay. Subsequently, I paid a visit to my aging relatives, an aunt and uncle, residing in the Los Angeles vicinity. While there, he facilitated my long-held wish to witness the rivalry game between Southern Cal and UCLA at the iconic Rose Bowl Stadium, a pinnacle event in college football. I also dedicated a day to unwind at Venice Beach, indulging in the sight of the toned bodies typical of California, clad in minimal attire. While browsing a gift shop by the beach, an idea struck me. I came across a postcard depicting 4 attractive, scantily dressed women under the title, "Greetings from Venice Beach." On each postcard, I inscribed a note expressing gratitude for affording me the opportunity to embark on this trip by engaging in extramarital affairs. I then dispatched one to my wife, Beth, and another to her lover, Clark, addressing them respectively at our home and the hospital. This escapade took place the weekend prior to Thanksgiving, marking the prelude to my journey to my ultimate destination. My closest friend from high school resided in Durango, Colorado, a stunning mountain town near the Four Corners region. He and his spouse had launched a small venture and required assistance with computer marketing and other digital arts. The arrangement suited me perfectly. He possessed a modest dwelling, which he had been utilizing as a rental property where I could lodge. Additionally, he proposed a flexible work timetable, granting me the liberty to travel wherever and whenever I pleased. Having dedicated ample leisure hours to traveling and writing, I had amassed material for what could potentially become a compelling book. I chronicled my personal journey, motivations, and reflections along the way. Once my responsibilities with Beth were fulfilled and I settled in Colorado, I could devote time to refining my manuscript. The narrative delved into the upheavals of middle-aged life, precipitated by a single, calamitous event. Unbeknownst to me on that Monday when I embarked on my journey towards Colorado, another unforeseen twist awaited, poised to alter the course of my life once more. A couple of days after I arrived in Durango, Chris, who is the wife of my friend Kyle, informed me that she had invited one of her friends over to share Thanksgiving dinner with us. According to Chris, this friend lived alone and didn't socialize much. However, Chris couldn't bear the thought of someone spending Thanksgiving alone. So she extended the invitation, which was accepted. It's interesting how significant life events can hinge on seemingly small decisions like that. Maybe I would have crossed paths with Maureen McDermott eventually, even if Chris hadn't invited her over. But who can say what might have transpired in the meantime? Perhaps Maureen would have moved away, or perhaps someone else would have come into her life. I can't say for sure. What I do know is that when Maureen entered Kyle and Chris's house, I felt a flutter in my stomach, and by the end of the day, I was determined to make her mine. I encountered a woman in her mid-30s, tall, nearly 6 feet, with a slender frame that wasn't gaunt. Her complexion was fair with freckles scattered across it. Her fiery red hair cropped short, and her gentle green eyes held a captivating mix of mischief and sorrow. Her voice, when she spoke, had the melodious charm of leprechauns. She hailed from Ireland, having migrated to the States as part of an Irish dance ensemble, akin to river dance, eventually settling in Denver. About a year prior, she relocated to Durango, following the abrupt termination of her engagement, which ended 2 days before the scheduled wedding. It appeared she had caught her fiancé red-handed with a hired stripper during his bachelor party. She hadn't planned on ruining his party, but on their way to breakfast with a few girlfriends after the bachelorette party, they passed by the club. There she noticed the groom and his friends leaving the club, and one of the girls was snuggling up to the groom. She became curious and decided to follow them to see what was going on. This event was a difficult ordeal for her, which aggravated an already difficult life. Her father was a violent alcoholic who terrorized her mother until they ran away when she was 15 after his aggression turned on her. Even then, he relentlessly pursued them until the authorities intervened, which led to his arrest. At the age of 22, she got into trouble while on vacation in London, after which she experienced many heart shocks, culminating in the betrayal of her fiancé. Perhaps our bond was so strong because we both understood the pain of betrayal. During my recent travels, I mulled over Beth's actions extensively, and found myself unable to reconcile her professions of love with the sight of her with another man in bed. Her betrayal of our marriage left me bewildered, with no understanding of her motives. Despite my attempts to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't deny that I cared deeply. I yearned to comprehend the demise of our once-cherished love and why Beth felt justified in seeking affection outside our marriage, disregarding my staunch belief in loyalty. While away, I kept abreast of developments at home primarily through emails with Laura, who appeared keen on repairing our strained relationship. She expressed concern for Jason, who had lost his job and was pleading with Beth to allow him back into their lives. I had a few brief conversations with Beth, but each time she began to get emotional or tried to apologize, I stopped her. However, I did assure her that I would listen to her when I returned, although I knew it wouldn't change my decision. I simply wanted to hear her perspective. By then, my mind was made up. I had decided to live in Durango, so I spent 3 weeks settling into my new home and assisting Kyle and Chris with their business. During this time, I also spent a considerable amount of time with Maureen. We had a deep conversation on Thanksgiving night, covering a range of topics, much to Chris's surprise and joy. As I walked her to her car, we exchanged a kiss. It wasn't passionate, but it held promise for the future. During the 3 weeks I spent there before heading back home, or more accurately, my soon-to-be former home, we went out on approximately 12 dates, gradually growing closer and more intimate. I was aware of the need for caution due to Maureen's past. She had suffered greatly from previous relationships and was understandably apprehensive about getting hurt again. However, the more I got to know her, the more evident it became that despite her past experiences, she possessed a passionate nature. She was an incredible kisser, with lips perfectly suited for enjoyment and a skilled tongue. The anticipation was agonizing because the more time I spent with Maureen, the stronger my desire for her grew. She exuded sensuality and had a captivating allure, yet I respected her cautious approach and her wish to take things slowly. My patience was finally rewarded the weekend before I was set to return to tie up loose ends with Beth. Kyle and Chris insisted on giving me a true taste of Colorado, so they organized a 4-day ski trip. There's a great ski resort just outside Durango, and Purgatory is really close, but they wanted me to fully enjoy the entire skiing experience. So they used their connections with a friend in the real estate industry who helped us secure a lovely 2-bedroom condo in Telluride, which is about 70 miles away. A few days before our departure, while having dinner with Maureen, the topic of the trip came up, and she inquired about what she should bring. I found myself momentarily speechless, and she responded with a subtle smile. "You knew I was going, didn't you, Shiwai?" She remarked. "I was hopeful, but I wasn't certain if it was appropriate for me to invite you," I admitted. "You're aware that the condo only has 2 bedrooms." "And why would that be a problem?" she asked, her smile widening. "Are you certain?" I questioned, holding her hands and gazing into her eyes. "Absolutely," she affirmed. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were the one I've been searching for all my life. I understand you, I know your heart, you're a good man, Pete, and you deserve happiness. I believe I can bring you that happiness." And she certainly did. On a chilly, crystal-clear Thursday morning, we made the drive up to Telluride. The recent heavy snowfall in the higher altitudes promised great skiing conditions, and indeed it delivered. My previous skiing experience was a distant memory from a college trip to Vail. Maureen had hit the slopes once before, accompanied by Kyle and Chris, the season prior. Despite our limited experience, both Maureen and I decided to take a recommended 1-day ski school session before venturing onto the slopes solo. After grasping the basics, we had a fantastic time navigating up and down the mountain. We wisely avoided the expert black diamond trails but dared to tackle a few intermediate blue ones, finding ourselves handling them with decent skill. Spending time on the mountain with Maureen, someone I had grown deeply fond of, was invigorating. Though unsure if love had yet blossomed between us, our mutual affection and comfort in each other's presence were undeniable. At the end of our first day, we were achy and exhausted. But it was the satisfying kind of soreness and fatigue that follows a day filled with enjoyment. The four of us gathered at a decently priced restaurant for our after-ski meal, where we celebrated our growing bond in every aspect. Upon returning to the condo, I took a shower and settled on the spacious waterbed with a book I had been reading, while Maureen indulged in a lengthy bath. I considered joining her, but opted not to pressure her, hoping she would initiate. I'm grateful I waited. She entered the bedroom, emanating the fragrance of peach blossoms, draped in a long, slightly weighty robe. Standing at the door, she flashed me a smile. Gradually, she loosened the robe's belt, allowing it to fall open. "Do you like what you see?" she teased, her gentle Irish accent adding to the allure. I just nodded, admiring Maureen's slender figure. I rolled off the bed and walked over to her. My hands explored her body as we hugged and kissed. It seemed to me that we were lost in some kind of surreal realm. When we got to the bed, we got down to business. Unlike my previous meetings with Marcy and Dolores, there was no rush, no urgent need to hurry. Instead, we enjoyed every moment, enjoying the opportunity to get to know each other better and establish contact with each other. I hope everything will be fine.